Hello and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we're following Jonathan Riddell, choreographer and artistic director of Riddell Dance Theater, as he creates his latest works for RDT's Second Story Dance project and delves into new creative ventures. Today, we're going to be focusing on Second Story, actually two different rehearsals, the November 21st rehearsal and November 28th. You have a 2-for-1 special today.
Try and keep them straight in my head.
Indeed, and if we mess up, you'll forgive us, I'm sure. So, November 21st was the day before Thanksgiving, and as a result, Steffi Nossen's studios were closed. But Jonathan was able to get a studio open space at Purchase, and there were no classes at Purchase, so it was nice and quiet, and you had the whole building to yourself. And I think Lorena, Mandy, and Jonathan were just thrilled to be there. It was a really nice experience. And also, Mandy's kids were there with the dancers with their lightsabers and Nerf guns.
That's right.
So
it was dangerous.
We'll tell you how in a moment. So the dancers started to catch up as usual with personal issues, professional ones, and of course, lots of things to talk about with the upcoming holidays. But soon enough, it was time to get down to business, and I know, Jonathan, you suggested to the ladies that they think about the order in which the pieces would be rehearsed, and it was decided that Mandy's piece for Lorena would be up first, followed by the voices duet, then the voices solo, and finally, in last place, Jonathan's solo.
Heading up the rear end.
Last but not least, for sure. And as it turns out, the ladies ran each piece twice. They ran through it the first time, still trying to get the choreography back and feel solid about it. And then whoever was the choreographer for that particular piece gave a couple of notes, and then they ran it a second time. And it turns out that, John, you said that there were very few notes, actually, at that point. So I believe that Lorena and Mandy felt pretty positive about the work they had done. Meanwhile, there's John going in and out of the studio to work on his solo, and he was able to review about 3/4 of it, John, I would say.
Yeah.
Now, in our last video cast, as you may recall, I asked Jonathan how he felt about bringing back Embers and Ash, just from a preliminary standpoint. And John, you spoke about feeling nervous at that time. Now that in this November 21st rehearsal, you actually began your work on it, how are you feeling?
That's interesting. First of all, I want to apologize because I am sick this evening. But the show must go on. But I'll be doing a lot of coughing, trying to talk through my whatever's going on back there. So sort of a very interesting thought process came about. One, this physical rundown that I just mentioned, I think already was starting back then, so I was already feeling pretty exhausted, and the thought of going through a really diligent, rigorous reconstruction process to bring back this solo was a little overwhelming, a little painful to think about, and I just sort of had to be really gentle with myself and say, we'll just take some baby steps, try and get a little momentum going, and maybe if you can't, I've kind of been in this habit of, kind of really fine-tooth combing moment by moment, and only once I'm kind of satisfied with that moment do I go on to the next. But that's not how I have always worked. It's something I've been trying, and it just felt completely wrong. I felt like I needed to really just kind of get a sketch back, kind of get the feel of the piece back, and then let the details kind of sift into place, maybe after going over it multiple times. And what was really nice about that is I gave myself a lot of permission to be wrong, to be incomplete about things, and at the same time trust that the answers are going to come. And I decided that I was going to just kind of get the main structure of the piece back, and then allow for some improvisation and allow for some decisions to be made on the fly, and kind of riff with it, the way like a jazz musician might, or an instrumental soloist might play with inflection and certain rhythms and things like that. So, which is not at all foreign to me in my career, but it's not anything I've approached this piece with before. And the necessity of the moment, how I felt, my physical condition, my emotional state, led me to that, and I think it wound up being a really great way to go, and almost the only way I could go.
Exactly. I mean, so interesting. I think here is a perfect example of the way in which context shaped the process. And your context, from what you're saying, sounds like it in a sense it left you with almost no choice other than the one you figured out. But what struck me was how comfortable you ultimately seemed to feel with those choices that you were now making, that they were, I think I have in my notes, you really seemed very open to your authentic self and your authentic voice, and listening to what it had to say literally in the moment.
Yeah, and part of it, again, was me sort of opening the doors to my past experience and saying, Jonathan, you've been able to perform harder things with this sort of approach, and so why not? But I also truly embraced it when I was able to sort of justify it artistically, and what I thought to myself was, it's been a goal of mine to keep going deeper and deeper with this piece, and when I really thought about a creature, a bird in this case, coming out of its shell and cracking open that shell, and I thought a little bit more about where those movements might originate, and some of them might originate in much more. It might come from a more intuitive place to a more animal place. So I let go of a lot of the artificial details, the external details, me like looking in a mirror and figuring out exactly how my hand and arm should be shaped, and I said, well, just sort of feel it grow out of your back and out of your spine and out of your torso, and trust that it's going to a beautiful place because it's coming from a beautiful intention.
Right.
And if you're really embodying an animal that's new to the world and unsure of things and is discovering things, then there's a lot of stuff that won't be known. So why not play with it and sort of respond to each movement? So as I execute one movement, how that unfolds then informs the next movement, informs the next movement. So it's much more move and then respond to your own self, which again is what improv really is. So.
Which is, so would you say that out of necessity really came what's turning out to be an opportunity artistically?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. And you know, if you believe in sort of fate and fortune, this was the next step the piece had to go down. And like I said, I was sort of searching for what the next layer of development for this piece would be, and then context sort of, whether it delivered the answer 100% or it sort of just nudged me in the right direction, you know, it's however you look at it. But you know, I all I can say is I did not, you know, sort of, I don't know, put an artificial constraint around what I thought it should be. I really just kind of listened in the moment and said, you know, what's next? What's next, universe? What's next, Jonathan? And there you go. So that's the journey I'm on with this piece at the moment.
Exactly. And when we go into the November 28th rehearsal, John will flesh that out even more, and we'll see a little bit about what that's actually translated into. But one more note, actually, about the November 21st rehearsal, as you may have guessed with the presence of Mandy's children, the dancers were propelled back into the creating while caregiving mode yet again, and had to make that adjustment, and dealing with dynamics such as the kids watching their videos at a very high volume, making it difficult for the dancers to hear their own music. Here we go again. And remember those laser guns and Nerf guns, lightsabers across the dancer's space? And the kids, of course, thought it was brilliant. I can't say that the three of you felt the same, but again, that was the context, and inevitably sibling altercations.
Yeah, well,
you know, that comes with the territory, of course. So the dancers had a taste of what originally caused us to create a second story in the first place. But moving on at this point now to the November 28th rehearsal 1 week later, starting, yes, you got it, with an external challenge. We got a text from Lorena saying that she was quite ill and could not make rehearsal.
Yeah.
So this is a week and a
scary because we only have 2 rehearsals.
Yes.
So one down.
One down.
That means we only have one more.
Okay, but actually, Mandy and John didn't jump right into rehearsing. Interestingly enough, while stretching, they began to brainstorm about possible paths that the three of them, if not more people, may be taking in the future, because with our Art Life program on December 9th, we may be watching Second Story as a project come to a close, since all of the children are now in school or school-related programs full-time. So that puts us in a period of transition, and ideas were flowing about what may be some possible paths to follow. So I thought, John, we would highlight some of the things that were spoken about. I mean, you know, just ideas tossed out preliminarily, not developed yet, but I think it gives a good idea as to what everyone's headspace is at this point in Second Story's development. First was, would it be possible moving forward to monetize our work? Don't have an answer to that yet, but that was thrown on the table.
It is possible.
It's possible. And that's where we have it at the moment.
We can
yeah.
talk more about that, but yeah.
Without question, that's probably an entire video cast.
Yeah, exactly.
Not for the first time, they spoke about potentially bringing in more dancers, likely Westchester-based. John and Mandy were thinking specifically about colleagues past and present who perhaps might be interested, and even contemplated holding an audition potentially for other dancers. So that may be a way to go. John asked Mandy, considering that she may be returning for her master's degree, do you think, and now that your kids are in school, do you think you might be able to devote a little bit more time to rehearsal if we did move forward with an option of dancing as part of RDT, for example? And I think Mandy is not sure about that. But again, that was raised as a possibility. One of the interesting conundrums that I think a lot of artists wind up wrestling with is the idea of the need to do outreach to raise money, but the need to raise money to be able to do outreach. So it's a bit of a quandary, but that was something discussed as well. Of course, I say of course because I'm with John quite a bit, and ideas spout out of his head regularly. I don't know how he generates them at the rate he does and in such a prolific way.
It's a curse.
Oh, but for those of us listening,
I'm tapped into some other dimension where the devils are reigned.
Wow. But for sure, you were clear that you had certain ideas and for works that you would ultimately like to develop at some point in time. Yeah. And the question was, might these works fall under the umbrella of RDT? Might they be part of an entirely new Westchester-based entity? Don't know, but there are certainly all kinds of possibilities that are cooking. Yeah. So we're going to keep you in suspense about that for the moment. And Jonathan reminded us again that, of course, with the second story concept, there was very little time outside of that once a week in the studio to work or even think about the pieces. So you had put forward, John, the thought that, well, if we continue as RDT or another entity, we would really need to put more time in, likely, than that. Yeah. And that work/thinking time outside of rehearsals would be really necessary to be able to come into rehearsal fully prepared and ready to go, which is probably much closer to the way you were used to working as a professional anyway. However, the big question mark here is, given the fact that Mandy and Jonathan and Lorena are primary caregivers, is that even realistic yet? So these are all the things that are just starting to surface, letting the ideas just percolate for the moment, and we'll certainly be giving it a much more in-depth thought as time progresses. But right now we're preparing for another show, so that is the priority. And as such, rehearsal progressed in the way I like to think about it from my perspective was in split screen. So I had Jonathan over here on my left and Mandy over here on my right. And here's what was going on. Mandy began walking through her solo from Lorena's piece Voices, and was then practicing specific phrases from part one of Voices, which is the duet, but in Lorena's absence, Mandy could simply, could only really focus obviously on her own part, but there was still plenty to review. Returns again to go over her section 2 solo. And then she moves into the piece that she choreographed for Lorena and really wanted to get it back in her own body so that she could be as helpful as possible to Lorena when she returns. And she basically alternated practicing with consulting the video of the piece and kind of going back and forth with that. And after a final part 2 solo run through, she did a little cool down at the bar and again returned to the videos to really let all of this percolate and internalize it. Meanwhile, at the very same time, Jonathan over here is starting or returning to Embers and Ash and starting with specific floor phrases and then moving on to gesture phrases, and we see him play with these sweeping arm movements and then a variety of weight transfers and off-balance turns. And this is all without music, and he's playing around with these specific pieces, shall we say, and then it's time to put the music on, and I'm still laughing, of course, because once again, he cannot sync his phone with the stereo. So we do the next best thing, which is putting the phone in the plastic cone to project the sound. We have to video this one day.
Like a sound bazooka.
Yeah, we have to record this for posterity. I'm convinced of it. But it did do the trick. And Jonathan then runs through it. And I have to tell you that from where I was sitting, I found it incredibly interesting because the way in which John now performed Embers and Ash definitely looked different to me. But it was less about the choreography and more about his aura. Because, and I, shared this with you, John, that you looked so much less tortured than I remembered you appearing. Now, granted, the piece called for that kind of angst for sure, and it was completely appropriate, but there was a quality to John's dancing on the 28th that was fresh and new. In fact, I called it content. I was like, John looks content. Wow. And even when he forgot a couple of things, it didn't even seem to bother you. It was like you just brushed it off. And as I said to you, I perceived this ghost of a smile the whole time. And I thought, whoa, it was just so striking to me. And then when he finished that run through, you like Rocky, triumphantly said, I did it, You were really happy. So springboarding from your description of your new approach to Embers and Ash from the 21st rehearsal, can you flesh it out a bit with what you did on the 28th to sort of take that and run with it?
Yeah, well, first of all, as you mentioned, I spent the first part of the rehearsal getting back that extra quarter that I hadn't gotten back yet, which is the floor material that you had mentioned.
Oh, okay.
And the final gestures of the section that I'm going to dance. But again, it was really from this new approach of just trying to look at it more as as a dance, if that makes sense. It is a dance, but I don't know there's many ways to approach a dance, and I had always we've talked about the piece many times on the videocast before, that there's this layer of just abstract movement, and then there's this layer where I am conveying this notion of being a phoenix, and then there's a third layer where I'm going through a personal story involving a lot of loss and rebirth in my own life. So I typically, when I have performed it in the past, try and think a lot about that third layer, because I've always felt like it's the most personal, and if I'm true to that, then what the audience will see, you know, they're one step removed. They're not inside my head, but they're gonna, you know, hopefully feel some of the feelings I'm feeling, maybe get some of the ideas I'm thinking from the gestures and things like that, and how my focus is. But they're also going to then see the abstract layers, the layers that are pure movement, and or that are this animal-like movement, and hopefully be interested in that. All that's to say that what I'm doing now is I'm trying to actually approach it from one of the other layers and not be so specific about that third personal layer, to allow a different personal story to come out, maybe, or different facets of my personal story to come out. And so the more I'm approaching it from just a physical standpoint, the way an animal might, or the way maybe an athlete might, it's allowing for a lot of new information and new experiences for me. And that inevitably translates to the viewer, as Sherry will attest. Now, it's interesting that you talked about my mood. I mean, I think that one, I was content. Well, I was content certainly because it felt really good. It felt good to just kind of listen to my body and be in my body, and not so in this tortured emotional state, like duh. But even if the dance were happy and I was trying to convey a happy story, that's still different than paying attention to your body, you know. And if your rib is just not quite in alignment yet on the right timing, you obey your body and you keep going until your rib is in the right alignment, whether, you know, and you don't jump ship or jump to the next movement until your body is truly ready to go. So I'm trying to approach it from that standpoint. So that I don't know, that certainly sounds like it might make me more content. Sure. I also was not, in not trying to convey the hardships of the story, was free to smile and just kind of enjoy myself. I also didn't have the pressure of really performing. I was, excuse me, just trying to run the piece and trying to get it back, and again, not put pressure on myself. So I think I really had a sense of humor about it in that run. But all of it's to say that it, I also kind of discovered in that run, like, oh, maybe there are happy moments in this dance, and maybe not everything about, I think I always wanted to say that, well, rebirth is hard and challenging and can be painful, but gosh, isn't it also delightful and exalting, and aren't there funny things that happen, and you know, you stumble and you fall down, well, maybe you laugh at yourself, and or maybe something just catches you off guard and it's delightful instead of scary. So you know, it was cool to kind of do it and enjoy it and still have it feel right for the piece.
Exactly. I mean, as you were speaking just now, it occurred to me that you actually, how would I say it? There was this expansive dimension that the piece became even more complex, more multi-layered. There were there's so many possibilities. It's as if you took that onion and discovered even more, and that you can play it any number of ways, I would imagine, at any particular point in time, given wherever you are, contextually, internally, etc. And I wonder if perhaps part of the aura of contentment that I was picking up on was the fact that you gave yourself the permission to approach it authentically. And that if you do, it seems to me you can't miss. If it's really true to who you are, and allowing it to come from a physically organic place. And it seemed to me that you released the pressure valve.
Yes, I absolutely did.
And maybe more than anything, I think one was that it was very organic and authentic, but the other, I just imagine that, the pressure just was released, and you were just grinning, like, oh man, that's great. So, but I think it's all that much richer and filled with possibility. And not just one thing, which is, and so it'll be interesting to see, I think, come, please, on the 9th.
Yes.
And see what emerges, because not even Jonathan really knows for sure, right? So, turns out then he ran the piece a couple of more times and would stop the music, like when you wanted to work on a particular phrase a little bit more, but overall, it went very well, and Mandy even noted that you seemed much more grounded in your dancing, and she actually seemed quite confident, thinking that the rest is just going to come from there, and advised you to be patient, give yourself the time to explore it, because this is still somewhat new, and it's going to come. You're going to be okay. So Mandy's completely convinced.
We all trust Mandy.
Well, and in fact, she was feeling confident in general, and she told us that, for example, with Brittle Branches, ever since the performance, she feels very, very good about that piece, and is really excited about the piece she choreographed for Mandy, for Lorena, because she says that she would like to develop this piece over time, and she would like to dance it herself. So she's imagining all kinds of possibilities moving forward with that. And that's really where we ended up, also on a kind of humorous note, as John was, again, ideas were spouting out of his head, and I think we ended on the winter extravaganza idea. I don't know if you even remember that.
To create a winter extravaganza of dance and theater and cabaret.
Oh, so you can see his face. So that just says everything. Whether or not it happens, who knows? But let's just say I felt that everybody was in a good place at that point, which is nice to know as we come into what very well may be our final performance as Second Story on December 9th. End of an era.
Perhaps. We'll see.
Yes.
We'll let you know.
So we'll have, I think, one more rehearsal to tell you about prior to the show, and then we'll break it down bit by bit, and I'll make John access all the feelings that arise as the show plays out. I imagine it will be infused with perhaps a sense of poignancy, as it may be the final Second Story one. It's really hard to say, but we'll be here to, again, open up And take a look inside Jonathan, and as always, thank him for his tremendous candor, which helps everyone to be able to then access that within themselves. So thank you, John, and thank you for being with us this evening, and we're excited to share with you these next couple of weeks and whatever emerges beyond that.
And hopefully I'll get rid of this little tickle here.
We're going to take care of it.
Okay. All right.
Thank you so much.